Well, first off, let me explain some things before I get going with the story. This happened when I was only recently figuring out that I was gay. I hadn't quite come out to everyone yet, and those who I had come out to, well, it was still kind of awkward. I must have been at least 17, but please don't judge me for the stupidity that follows. So, it was a weekend during the day, and I was browsing this online dating site. I had never dated anyone before, being a late lesbian bloomer, so I was really excited and curious to eventually find someone great. Keep in mind that I was most certainly not looking for hookups. I message a couple of people who sound nice and am about to log off when this person messages me. They don't have much info on their page and just have one picture. But I decided to humor this person and have a conversation. We hadn't talked for long before this person says that we should meet up. She didn't live too far from me, so it wasn't undoable. However, the moment she said that we should meet up, red bells started going off in my head. I've always been a careful person and never one to take risks, but I had recently been worrying that I was too careful and that I might be missing out because I wasn't seizing the moment and just jumping into things, feet first. I thought I needed to loosen up a bit and get out of my comfort zone. Anyways, I end up agreeing to meet this person, and the place she arranges I meet with her is around a 20-minute drive away. Another red bell that goes off is that she tells me to wear a dress or a skirt. I hated dresses and skirts, so I don't actually own any. Therefore, I just wear shorts. Before I head out, I tell my friend where I'm going. This was the one smart thing I did. I told her the location I was heading, and that if I hadn't texted her again in around 2 hours, then she should take action. I jokingly said that if I hadn't contacted her within the time frame, then I probably had been kidnapped and sold as a sex slave. She wanted to know what I was up to, but I refused to tell her. So I tell my mum that I'm going to the store and I head out to meet this person. The place that she told me to go is in a kind of sketchy neighborhood, but I keep going because I remind myself that I'm too nervous. I arrive at the park she specified, and to my relief, there was one other person there, a lady with her child. I keep a close eye on this lady and find comfort in her presence. I wait at the park for a while. I had arrived at the specified place and at the specified time, but where was this girl? I leave around half an hour later. The lady was probably really confused as to why I was there, because I had arrived, stood by a fence for half an hour, and then left. I make the drive back home and go on my computer to find out what had happened. The person explains that she had arrived there but had been spooked because a car full of creepy guys had drove by. She asks me to return to the same place. I say no and she starts to beg me and tries to dirty talk me. I wasn't into it because, as I said, I wasn't into one-night stand business. The person then states that she had seen me and that I had looked cute in my pink shorts. This I found kind of creepy because whoever this was had been spying me from afar. At that point, I just shut down the whole conversation and logged off. It didn't occur to me until quite a while later, but the person probably never arrived at the park because that lady with her child was there. The online profile was probably fake and was actually some dude trying to pick up lesbians. Some really creepy dude. The dude had probably been waiting in his car for the lady and the child to leave before he made his move. Whether that be mugging me or raping me or both, I don't want to know. It was in a pretty deserted area of the neighborhood, so no one would have ever heard me if I yelled for help. So now that I'm older and wiser, sometimes I'll think back to this day and send a silent thanks to that random lady who probably saved me from something terrible. Nowadays, I listen to my gut and don't worry about being too timid or too careful. Those kind of things keep you safe. Consider this story as a preemptive warning to anyone who wants to do urban exploration. Don't. Just don't. I have done Urbex for 3 years, and after September 14th of 2016, I will never do it again. I can't begin to describe the horrors that I endured within the dark and decrepit halls of Western State Lunatic Asylum. The place is truly hell. The complex stretches countless acres over the hilly, mountainous terrain of Staunton, Virginia. It's a monstrous complex, and the place reeks of death and hatred. It's a darkness like no other. I was naive to the thoughts of what this dark complex was truly capable of harboring. At the time, leading up to it, I considered it just another broken stripped shell of a structure. Armed with my camera, flashlight, a few snacks and my trusty Smith & Wesson 9mm that I always carried, I entered the looming structure. To put things into an understandable perspective, take the most darkest memory from your childhood, anything at all, and amplify it continuously. This is how this building felt. It was liquid. You could practically drink the dark feeling that emanated from this place. This place was just pure evil. I get goosebumps just thinking about just how dark this place was. It didn't take long for me to begin regretting my decisions. I started with the main floor. It held admissions, a few offices, a couple of patient rooms, and what I assumed to be an archive room of some sort, a place where patients' files were kept. The feeling only got worse from there. The first floor, right above the ground floor, felt like I was swimming through a sea of darkness. It was almost like my flashlight couldn't pierce it, and it felt so bad in there. The first floor was composed of mostly patient rooms. Minimal care or minimal security patients, I assumed. I could tell because the doors of each room weren't barred up or steel frames. I guess these were patients with disorders like depression, minor schizophrenia, or basic dementia, but I wouldn't know though. The second floor? Oh boy, the second floor. If I could have gotten any closer to hell, the second floor would have been the gateway. There was a weight to the atmosphere around me, suffering and sorrow mixed with a burning, unforgivable hatred, and it got worse as I went down the wing. There was one particular room that I passed that seemed to be the worst, room 26B. Against my better judgment, I opened the massive steel frame door. The feeling that overtook me is something that I'll never be able to put into words. Every dark and sad feeling that ever existed in the world crawled and snaked its way into my skull. Right then and there, I collapsed, sobbing, like a child who just had his toy taken away. I just cried and cried and cried. A crippling depression coated itself over me. I felt myself reaching for my pistol. All of a sudden, I wanted it to end. The horrendous suffering that scratched and clawed at the walls of my mind. I wanted to just disappear. And the next thing I know, I blacked out. I woke up an unknown amount of time later and found myself curled up as tight as a ball as I could possibly be. I had pissed myself, and I was covered in a mix of dirt, dust, sweat and tears. I was a mess. I had no idea where I was or how long I'd been there. I looked at my watch. September 16th, 2016, 2:30 a.m. I groggily came to the realization that I had been in this prison for 2 full days. My phone was dead, my flashlight was dead, my pistol had no ammo in any of the clips that I had brought with me, and all my snacks that I had brought were gone. I looked around warily and saw that I was sitting in a chair in the center of a hallway. Judging by the numbers on the room doors, I was on the 3rd floor. I had slashes and cuts all over my arms. I made the sickening conclusion that they were most likely self-inflicted. I picked up my broken body and walked, limped, and waddled down the stairwell to the ground floor. I made my exit from the building, holding myself. My mind was shattered. Images of mutilated figures, broken bodies, the smell of decay and death, and the sense of nothingness bled through my mind. I had no idea what the hell was going on. I got into my truck, sat down in my driver's seat, and just sobbed. I hadn't cried this much and this hard since the death of my father. There was nothing that could ever compare to what I felt in there. I checked myself into the local hospital where I was treated for my scratches and wounds. Then I was held in a padded room for a few hours while the doctors contacted my frantic mother, who had since put out a missing persons report. I've never been the same mentally since that day. I get horrible nightmares, splitting headaches and bouts of depressions. It's like I'm practically begging to die. It's been 2 months now. Waking up from my nightmare forced me to sit down and tell you my story. Listeners, and anybody who even thinks about the idea of going urbexing, please take it from someone who doesn't know what happened for the 2 days that I was trapped in hell. Don't. For the love of all that's good, don't do it. That cheap thrill isn't worth the toll that I had to pay. I was about 19 at the time. I'm a half-white skinny little female, not intimidating at all. This takes place in Oahu, Hawaii, the Waikiki and surrounding area. So, I was living with my older cousin and his family at the time, in a small city about an hour bus ride from Waikiki. My cousin had a daughter, we'll call her Mariah, who was 17 years old, and for a lack of a better phrase, extremely hot. Her side of the family is Polynesian, and she had long, beautiful dark hair, a huge ass, and a tiny waist. She was also a wild child, but, to her father's relief, a lesbian. Because of this, her parents didn't really keep too close of an eye on her. They all openly smoked pot and drank, so they didn't really care if she did, as long as she graduated high school. She can't get pregnant, so there's not much trouble she can get into, right? Fucking wrong. One Saturday night, Mariah told her parents she was staying the night at her mutual friend of ours' house. I knew our friend was out of town, so I knew she was lying. I didn't want her to get in trouble, so instead of busting her, I decided to just tag along and keep an eye on her. So we got ready, said goodbye to her parents, and walked to the bus stop. Where are we really going? We're meeting some crew at the Wakes. I had no idea what that meant, but didn't want to look uncool, so I just went along with it. An hour later, we got off the bus near downtown Waikiki. I followed her to a strip of bars on the edge of the tourist section, the last stop before the pretty lights faded and the buildings looked closer to Detroit than Hawaii. We stopped at a punk bar called Mercury. At first, I was confused because we were underage, until I spotted a group of grimy-looking local teens congregating on a fire escape in an alley between Mercury and a dive bar. The teenagers got excited when they saw Mariah. "We've been waiting on you, we got the shrooms." A short-haired chick grabbed my niece into a hug, then shoved a baggie into her hand. "Guess we got enough for the Haole girl too." "She's not Haole, she's my auntie." Maria defended me, and before I could stop her, dumped the baggie of mushrooms into her mouth. Well, fuck. I wasn't really sure what to do, and these teenagers were kind of sketching me out. But Mariah was going to be tripping soon, and I couldn't bring her home like that. She seemed to trust these kids, so I settled in without letting my guard down, till I could figure out what to do. I hadn't been in Hawaii long, so I had no friends to call to bail us out and give us a place to crash. "It's early, she'll be fine by 2 or 3. A voice behind me on the fire escape said. I turned to see a Japanese guy in his late 20s wearing a long-sleeve shirt despite the heat. I nodded, not knowing what to say. "I'm Gyro. You Mariah's auntie?" Yeah, nice to meet you. Sorry I'm being a drag, I just hate babysitting people when they trip." He laughed and shook my hand. We talked amicably for an hour or so, watching as Mariah started to trip. She was making an ass of herself and getting a little physical with her friends, male and female. Soon enough, one of the guys took it too far and grabbed her ass. She didn't mind at first, but he kept getting more and more aggressive. His hand kept inching further and further up her skirt, and even in her intoxicated state, she recognized it was unwanted attention and told him to back off. He didn't take it well.
"You wear a skirt like that and you think you're not gonna get cherry?"
He spat at her, still holding onto her thigh with one hand, a Four Loko in the other. I didn't really understand what he was saying, but I picked up on the tone and context. This wasn't good. I stood up to step in, but Gyro beat me to it. He jumped down the side of the fire escape, landed on his feet gracefully, and knocked the 4Loko out of the horny teenager's hand.
Oh, you like to throw, huh?
The teen stood, ready to fight. Gyro had his back to me, so when he lifted his shirt to expose his stomach, I was really confused. The teenager, on the other hand, understood immediately, and the colour left his face, along with the hormonal bravado. He looked terrified. Mariah, really tripping now, scrambled away from the teen and ran to my side. I hugged her, glad she was okay. "Let's go." Gyro waved for us to follow him, and, not knowing what else to do, we obliged, leaving the group of teens gaping at us as we walked away. We walked in silence for about 15 minutes, till we reached a dingy, small apartment complex. Gyro turned to me and asked if we would like to come up to his place since it was so late. That way, I wasn't stuck walking around Waikiki at midnight with a tripping 17-year-old in a miniskirt. Seeing as he had just saved our asses and I didn't see any alternative, I said yes, and we followed him up. Inside the apartment was no better than the outside. It was a studio with no furniture save for a futon on the floor and a kitchen table with 2 chairs. The walls were bare and yellowed from cigarette smoke. There was one door leading to a tiny bathroom. Mariah was starting to feel nauseous, so I laid her on the futon and took a seat at the kitchen table next to Gyro. We talked idly for half an hour or so, just small talk. Then, suddenly, Gyro took off his long-sleeve shirt, revealing the wife-beater underneath, and the tattoos. His entire torso and both arms were covered in an intricate weaving of dragons and Japanese writing. Remembering the horny teenager's reaction when Gyro showed him his stomach, my blood ran cold. This dude was a gangster, a Japanese gangster. Fucking Yakuza. I had seen tattoos like that before, and it was no joke. Fuck. I tried to mask my surprise, but he picked up on it and smirked devilishly, clearly amused at my discomfort. I was frantically trying to plot an inconspicuous exit strategy, but coming up short. Did I want to face Mariah's dad's wrath, or stay here with a Yakuza I had known for all of 3 hours who seemed nice, if a bit distant? If what happened next hadn't have happened, I don't know what I would have done, honestly. Suddenly, Gyro's phone started ringing, and he walked into the bathroom before answering. I could hear him speaking Japanese angrily, seemingly arguing with whoever was on the phone. He then stormed out of the bathroom, walked over to the futon, grabbed a box from underneath it, and opened it. The shoebox was filled with stacks of 20s and large bags of meth. He rifled through the box angrily, seemingly looking for something and not finding it. Mariah, who had earlier dozed off, was awake and watching him, wide-eyed and panicky. She started to get off the futon, and Gyro snapped at her, telling her to stay put. She froze. I think we should go. She seems okay now. We should go before the last bus runs." I lied quickly, knowing the buses had stopped running hours ago. I had money for a cab fare. "You're not going anywhere. My shit is missing." "You were here the whole time. When would we have time to take your shit?" He looked annoyed, then like he was thinking. "Empty your purses and pockets." We obliged. "Take off your bra and show me you're not hiding anything." We did this as well, reluctantly. Mariah was crying now. I tried to stay calm. "Can we go now?" "Get the fuck out of my sight." We booked it out of his apartment without looking back. As soon as we got outside, I called us a cab. We rode home in silence, knowing that we had dodged a bullet. I'd like to say Mariah calmed down after this, but that's not true. She's in her 20s now, just as wild. But as far as I know, she stayed away from shrooms and Yakuza since that night. To give you some context, this occurred roughly 14 years ago when I was 12 years old, and living in the east side of Australian rainforest. When I say rainforest, our house wasn't a 40-acre property surrounded by bush. The house itself was owned by a Swiss man named Hans. Occasionally, he would come down with his tractor and slash the long grass surrounding our house, so we could access slightly more of the property in the summer. It was also extremely handy because if you know anything about Australia, it's that we have tons of beasties that can very easily kill you. We lived about a 40-minute drive from the small town centre. This meant that if we needed groceries, medical attention, or to contact our parents, it would be a 40-minute drive before anything could be done. The house sat on the side of a large mountain, roughly 3/4 of the way up, so naturally, most of the land we called home was strewn with valleys, nooks, and hideaways. We had trails we could walk, and they led to a stream and a small waterfall. It was a truly beautiful place, but considerably scary to me and my small siblings. We knew our neighbours on both sides of the property, but because the location of our house was pretty remote, our nearest neighbours were roughly a 10-minute drive away. One was a lovely old lady who used to wave at us when we got off the school bus before we made the trek to her house every day. The other was a middle-aged man and his family. He was a real jerk who excavated around the bottom border where our properties met and continuously interrupted the stream and waterfall's clear-flowing water supply. Lots of strange and creepy shit happens when you're living in the middle of nowhere, but one in particular involved a guy that I certainly don't want to meet again. Being pretty removed from people, it was extremely rare that we ever got visitors we didn't know were coming. When people we didn't recognize turned up, it was usually because they were lost and needed directions. One day though, a man in a ute came roaring down our driveway. I remember running inside to tell my dad someone weird was here. He immediately walked outside to see who this unwanted guest was. A little background about my dad. He is literally the most hardcore person you will ever meet. He has one leg after having it amputated earlier on in his life after having an accident on a motorcycle. He was in the Navy and was brought up in a very strict household. He had grown up in a very rough part of Sydney's west, so he had some pretty shady contacts too. In short, he is someone you really don't want to fuck with. I wouldn't be surprised if he had killed someone in his life prior to having kids. Anyway, my dad goes outside to see what all the commotion is about while my mum keeps us inside, being protective. The man has a large red furred dog in the back of his car that looks like a German Shepherd cross. It snarled at my dad, but immediately cowered when this stranger told it to shut up. Our own dog, Millie, renowned beast killer just for the record, was snarling and going ballistic while being chained up to the house. "Hi, my name is John." The way the man spoke was like he was a salesman, a really slick and smooth guy who on the outside seemed friendly, but with the overtone of wanting something. My dad immediately responded with, "So what the fuck are you doing here then, John?" The man was taken aback, obviously not used to dealing with someone as hostile as my dad. They then talked for a while, and I could hear my dad talking with a sense of confusion about whatever this man had to say. I did, however, overhear my dad say, "What the fuck are you thinking? Just call the cops." I found out later that the lovely old lady next to us had died. Apparently, John was on the other side of her property and went to visit and found her dead. He also asked my dad if they should move the body to make it easier for the police to investigate. This is obviously why my dad was telling the man to call the police immediately. Anyway, later that night the police showed up to take a statement from my dad and John, who was hanging around at our house until the police arrived. I remember my dad pulling an officer aside and explaining that John wanted to move the body when he first arrived. The police left without any more questions, as it looked like she had died from a natural cause. John was still at our house. I found him to be a very unsettling person. The way he smiled, the dark of his eyes, he was unfamiliar, but acting like he was one of us. I remember it was a school night and I was trying to watch TV and he was playing songs on his guitar with my mum and dad at the table. I was angry because he was ruining my shows and I told mum I wanted him to go and that I thought he was weird. She smiled and told me that she felt the same and told me that I should go to bed. The next day, things seemed normal. I went to school and came home. Not seeing the familiar face of the old woman stung a bit on my way past her house. It felt strange, and I hoped that she knew her family loved her before she passed. I was a bit sad on the walk home, until halfway down the driveway, I noticed John's ute again, parked out the front of our house. I walked closer and was greeted by his dog, Rusty. He walked outside with my dad, and I heard him call Rusty to his car as he was leaving. Apparently he was borrowing tools from my dad. He left and waved goodbye like he was someone that I was going to miss or something. Again, that sense of overfamiliarity made me feel uncomfortable. I didn't know this man. I didn't like this man, and I was hoping that he would never come down our driveway again. My dad then pulled me aside and asked me what I thought of John. I labeled him a weirdo and told my dad I was hoping he wouldn't come back. For the second night in a row, when John returned Dad's tools, he was sitting in our house playing guitar and annoying everyone. My mum and dad were visibly unimpressed by the situation. I heard my mum and dad argue about him hanging around until eventually my dad told him he needed to leave, as it was time for us to go to bed. He insisted that it was early and tried to make an excuse to stay. I found that very odd. I was polite enough to know when someone didn't want me around, so why didn't this man? Or if he did know, why wouldn't he leave? After ushering him out, my mum and dad had a big talk in their room. My dad told us that he didn't like John and that he was going to ask him not to come over anymore, and if we saw John again, immediately tell him. The next day was a Saturday, and we were going to blow up our cheap inflatable pool and go for a swim as it was getting pretty warm. Around 11 a.m, the sound of a car thundering down the driveway alerts me, and I go outside. I run back inside to tell my dad that John is back. Just like the first time I ever laid eyes on John, my dad goes outside and we stay inside with my mum, watching and listening through a screen door. John again, with his weird, overfamiliar smile and dark eyes, greets my dad and is met with, "Look mate, I don't know who you think you are, but I don't want you coming around here anymore. You scare my kids and my wife, and I don't want you to come back. You understand?" I didn't hear John's reply, but from his tone, it sounded like he was confused and tried to reason with my dad. Dad wasn't having it, and told him to go or he would call the cops. As he was leaving, Dad said, "Don't come back or you'll be sorry." This is where things truly get weird. As my dad lays this subtle threat on this man, his face completely changes to one of rage. He glares at us in the house, sticks up his finger and speeds out of the driveway, shouting profanities and churning up the gravel, spraying it towards our house. My dad came back and told us that we wouldn't be seeing John anymore, and if we did, we were going to call the police. I was relieved. This odd man made me feel uncomfortable in my own home, and the way he reacted when he left confirmed the feeling I got from him when I first saw him. I can't remember if it was the Sunday or the Monday after that day, but John did come back. He tried to reason with my dad and say sorry for whatever caused us to not like him. Before he even got out of the ute, my dad said, "If you don't turn around and leave, I'm gonna smash your face in." He did just that. My dad then called the police to inform them of what happened. Apparently, they were going to go and talk to John. I didn't hear any more of what happened to that conversation. A few weeks went by with no sightings or happenings with John, and we all felt like things were getting back to normal. This was until our mailbox had been tipped out of the ground and smashed, or possibly run over. I remember asking my dad what happened, but he wasn't about to give me any ideas. He later told me that he knew it was John after the way their last conversation ended. The next weekend, after the mailbox incident, we went into town to get some groceries and a fast food dinner. And when we came home down the driveway, my dad immediately stopped my mum from proceeding and said that something was wrong. Next to the carport where we parked our car, at the back of the house, there was a window that opened to the bathroom. My dad must have spotted that the window was missing. As we drove down, he got increasingly more tense until we all noticed the window was missing. I remember being confused in the back seat, not really knowing what was going on, until I saw it. A man, dark eyes, overfamiliar, coming from the window that led to the shower. My dad was exploding with rage. He told my mum to rush down the driveway so we could fuck this guy up. The man proceeded to escape the window and run down the back of our property into thick lantana. My dad, being on one leg, let Millie loose as she was going ballistic tied up to the house. She raced down the lantana-engulfed hill into the darkness. She came back with nothing. My dad went out with his flashlight and couldn't find anything either. I'm not sure if anyone slept that night. None of our possessions had been stolen or even moved. We must have caught this man just as he was entering our house. The police came the next day and searched for fingerprints, with no avail. My father was furious and again alerted them to John and his strange behavior. They told us that they would look into it once again. That was the last time we heard from John that year. I had almost completely forgotten about him and had the summer off to enjoy myself and get ready for high school. The school I went to was pretty large, considering where we were, but everyone seemed to know each other pretty well, including the teaching staff. Within my first week at school, we were introduced to all of the teachers and teachers' aides. I was caught completely unaware when that overfamiliar dark-eyed man from the previous year was introduced as a teacher's aide. Except, instead of John, he was introduced as Gregory something. I went into a little bit of a spin as I was trying to make sense of it all. I was 100% sure that this man named Greg something was the same man who introduced himself to my family as John. At that moment, so many things rushed into my head. What if he killed the old lady? What if he didn't live close by? What if he wanted to move the body so he could frame my dad? If he lied about something as critical as his name, what else was he lying about? What if police never made contact with him? I was sitting there for a good 10 minutes, trying to piece it together, until the teacher called my name to bring me back to reality. That is when he noticed me. The look on his face when he saw mine was one I'll never forget. He immediately recognized me. He looked shocked. His eyes were wide, and he said nothing. Just staring, I had just found out his dirty little secret. I could sense that he was now the one feeling uncomfortable and on edge. Later that day, I rushed home to tell my dad who I had found. He was shocked and repeatedly asked me, was I sure? He went to the school the next day and discovered that the man had put in for indefinite leave yesterday and may not return. When we learned of the news, my dad told me to watch out and let him know should John or Greg ever return.